Once there was a time before once upon a time. From the earliest beginnings of humanity, it is storytelling that has set us apart from the other animals. It's how we make sense of ourselves, our relationships, our aspirations, our chaos and contradictions, how we dream of tomorrow. I have a deep fascination with story and storytelling, this ancient art that reaches out to each of us in subtly different ways. I want to get a sense of how the stories we consume are born and shaped, and how they in turn shape and define us.
The way of nature and the way of grace. You have to choose which one you'll follow.
Stories shape us. I think we have, either consciously or unconsciously, the sense of who we are and the trajectories that we're on. They come from stories. Someone told us a thing, or we ingested a thing, and some of those stories are super explicit. I'm going to go to college, and then I'm going to have a job, and then I'm going to get married, and that's a story.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you.
We will look at those complex and nuanced dynamics inside the structure and making of stories to understand more about how the intent and craft of storytelling is evolving.
And the vision that was planted in my brain.
We live in a very digital world. We're all on our phones, we're on social media, we think digital is very important. But stories aren't new. Stories have been around for thousands of years, right? The first story, the first word of mouth was a caveman sort of telling another caveman, don't eat this, it's poisonous, or this is the direction I went to go hunting. Stories have been around forever. What's changed is our ability to tell stories, our ability to reach a larger audience with those stories, and most importantly, our ability to understand stories, why they work, right? We all know people who are great storytellers, but I think now we can engineer good stories because we can break them down into chunks, understand how they work, understand the behavioral science behind them, and use that to build more effective stories.
I want to examine how technology is giving storytellers options. Perhaps we should say powers they have never had before.
One of the things that we say is the most disruptive technology we see is inside of the stories themselves. That is, our understanding of how the elements of a story come together and how those unfold and how they connect to audience, like that is going through this revolutionary change right now. And it's not about, oh, I click a certain kind of button, or there's a augmented reality or whatever. Like, that's a little tiny shaving in the corner relative to the fact that we can understand very fundamentally the way an audience responds at a scale we've never been able to, with the speed we've never been able to.
I want to look at the relationship between story and storyteller, and how the relentless drive that storytellers exhibit allows them to create moments that truly connect.
Will you fight? Right? Against that? No! We will run! And we will live. Aye. Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
You know, the best stories are when you connect. The best stories are when you feel you can see yourself in that story, and we kind of take that one step further by going, we find some of the best experiences are when you're the protagonist in a story that's happening to you. And the most exciting thing for me is, trying to create those Mr. Ben experiences where you step through that door and you're in another world.
Yeah, I think, the golden rule of storytelling, or certainly of novel writing, is show, don't tell.
There are core elements within stories, themes that reflect who we are, that for the past 50,000 years have remained the same.
There are fundamental aspects of the human character that are not changing, and those are epic search for meaning and the tension of how we are alive and dying at the same time and what love is in that context. I think all those things are the same, whether it's a cave painting or we're listening to Homer around a fire or the sagas of Odin. We want to hear those same pieces and those same themes, and elements of that are always going to be fascinating to us. Blood, fire, revenge, love.
The only thing that comes to mind is a poem whispered by someone in love hundreds of years ago. Unable to perceive the shape of you, I find you all around me.
Those things aren't going to change.
So if indeed the themes remain the same, what is it that continuously pulls us in?
Power of story is initially emotional, and then you qualify it by understanding why that emotion matters. Then ultimately, where's the truth in that? And then what's the output?
We all go through common emotions as humans: rage, sadness, fear, loss. While the surface details of those may be quite different, I think the core things that make us human are the things that unite us. So yeah, my intention when I'm writing is to connect to those universal emotional truths that readers can identify with, even if they're, biographically nothing like I am.
Dad? Dad, come on. You gotta get up. Dad, we gotta go home.
As much as the story itself has to resonate, aren't we also drawn to the nuance of how those narratives are conjured? The breathtaking beauty of a book's typography, the iconic cover art of an album, the dynamic virtuosity of the camera work in the latest action film, the new perspective from a performer that brings the narrative to life in a new way. Often, it is the radical departure or the bolder form of storytelling that gets noticed.
And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
David Simon, who wrote The Wire, which is one of the greatest, most intelligent television shows that doesn't spoon feed you, he talked about how when he was writing and people would say, just write for the dumbest part of your audience and this would incense him. I want to be made to feel more intelligent by understanding something that might be a little bit of a reach rather than watching Love Island. But I guess I would always credit my readers with intelligence rather than trying to give them the lowest common denominator.
You can't tell me this shit can't get done without people beating on each other, killing each other, doing each other like dogs.
Talking about The Wire earlier, and I used to love the fact that each episode was as long as it needed to be to tell the story. And I just thought, oh, that is really cool, because it is just driven purely about how do we get this idea over.
He's the devil down in the hole.
Every story changes in subtle ways in the telling of the lesson within the narrative. There is an experiential, elemental edge to storytelling, and the tools we have to craft these new flavors of experience have evolved more in the last generation than ever before.
There's a lot of interesting research going on in AI. And some of this research, GPT-3 and other sort of technologies, can build stories. And what these things do is they learn language from reading large corpuses of documents, so they understand how language works. And so they can create new things based on things they already know. The challenge is, just like a child can only learn from what they understand, to make a great story, well, if you took great stories and less good stories and you trained the system on the great stories, it might be able to spit one out that is more like the great stories and less like the not so good ones. So eventually, do I think that will happen? Probably. Are we there yet? I'm not sure. And it also depends on what we input into the system, right? Like anything else, it's only as good as what we put in it. And so if we teach it the right things, it may be able to tell great stories, but I still think there's a place for people in the machine.
The two biggest opportunities that we see in front of us and the two biggest mistakes are the same, which is data and automation. And this idea that data is going to provide all the answers as opposed to shape the answers is one, and that automation is going to replace creativity rather than shape creativity is the other. The problem that we have is the people who are good at data and good at automation don't understand creativity, and the people who understand creativity are frightened of those two things.
You know, one way of looking at it can be that we're all done as artists and storytellers, but another way of looking at it is that that's just opened up a whole new, wonderful way of creating and imagining, and actually it comes down to how creative you are that gets you to a new place.
There's the weird thing about search engines. There's like striking oil in a world that hadn't invented internal combustion. Too much raw material. Nobody knew what to do with it. You see, my competitors, they were fixated on sucking it up and monetizing via shopping and social media. They thought that search engines were a map of what people were thinking, but actually they were a map of how people were thinking. Impulse, response, fluid, imperfect, patterned, chaotic.
As always, technology is on the move. But the real drivers are as yet still very much human. The proclivities of these master manipulators to charm and weave and conjure experiences that are game-changing, perhaps even life-changing, have never been so sought after. And it seems they feel they're only getting started.
Well, we're in the business of storytelling, but we're also in the business of taking our audience on an adventure. You are constantly trying to switch them on and to activate them. Actually, when you do that, what you're doing is you're opening up people's mind to possibilities.
One of the main takeaways from these deeper and more pervasive experiences is that audiences don't want them to stop. They want more.
I read an interesting thing about some of the sort of very complex movie making now, these movies with this sort of mythic backstory, lore, and so on. The contention of this article was you couldn't have that in an age where there wasn't YouTube, because you need, 8 people who are dissecting, like, what does this mean and what does that mean in this, and make the connection and unpack it. And so our movies and other forms of media, I think, are getting much more complicated because we want it. We want to go in a world and we want to dig in and we want to be like, who's this person and who's that person? How are they related to each other?
Dee essentially uses chess to explain the drug trade. The rooks are the stash, the queen is the muscle, and the king is top dog. They even go so far as to naming the pieces after actual people in their gang.
But he ain't got no hustle. But the rest of these motherfuckers on the team, they got his back. And they run so deep, he really ain't gotta do shit. Like your uncle. Yeah, like my uncle.
The pawns are described as the soldiers, and in reality, these kids are the soldiers in their gang, and so they naturally identify with the pawns. What's interesting is what Wallace's question is after he learns about the pawns.
And they like the front lines. They be out in the field.
So how do you get to be the king?
It ain't like that. See, the king, stay the king.
So the complexity of storytelling is becoming more led by the audience. A whole industry has sprung up dedicated to unpacking every popular series, every film franchise, and every storyline. from multiple perspectives.
That was when I realized it was a father-son story going on.
In this interview, Tarantino reveals a crucial truth about filmmaking. He shows us how he subconsciously put a deeper meaning in his movie. It doesn't matter if directors work with one meaning in mind or work purely on intuition.
The rabbit hole the audience wants to go down is deeper and more twisting than ever. Perhaps the first storyteller who really played with those layers was the mercurial Orson Welles. Here was an unfettered storyteller, a psychologist. He was irrepressible and mischievous, an original that defined the possibilities. Earlier in his career, Welles struck a nerve with the American press. He awoke on Halloween 1938 to be greeted by headlines related to his radio production of the previous evening, a radio adaptation of War of the Worlds.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
They had reimagined this 40-year-old book as a series of fake news bulletins coming in from across America, reporting on an invasion from Mars. In some regions, listeners who had missed the opening credits couldn't distinguish what they were hearing from reality.
This is the end now. Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city.
The unease that was projected through the harsh and edgy tension of the radio performance evolved into real panic. There were calls to the police, to newspapers and radio stations, and the hysteria spread like wildfire. There were even ominous reports of rage and anger directed at Orson Welles himself.
Do you think, Mr. Welles, that you might have taken unfair advantage of the public?
Some thought that the world was ending. An urban myth even evolved that in some remote places people had committed suicide. This, thankfully, was not true.
Do you think there ought to be a law against such enactments as we had last night as a result of that?
He has to think quick. He has to know his audience.
You don't play down the melodramatic effect of a melodrama.
It's hard to argue with his logic. The trick is to be sincere. Storytellers have long understood that the raw material they're working with is their audience. And they know that understanding that audience is going to go a long way towards being able to connect with them. And perhaps, even more importantly, surprise them.
How did we know that this plan would work? We had a spy on the inside, that's right. On the British government, I take the measurements, information, and then I smuggle it. To my brother's revolutionary covenant, I'm running with the sons of liberty, and I am loving. Sounds to have a penny walk against the perfect ends. We in the Chanel, somebody's gotta shuffle it. Hercules Mulligan, I need no introduction when you knock me down. I get the shut back.
Data is not a blueprint to succeed. Data is a tuning fork that allows you to shape a story to an audience and connect to that audience in a way that you haven't before.
And I'm ready for love. Let the stormy clouds chase everyone.
The reality wrapped up inside all of these transformative feelings is that we all need a touch of the what if. A dash of wild adventure that plunges into that different headspace. People need escape. And sometimes that can mean going deeper.
So once you immerse somebody in a completely different reality and you take them from their world into this new fantastical world, then there's a kind of mixture there in this fully 360 immersive experience where it's audience focused, where it's well researched, where it's socially engaged, and where people are taken to a magical, fantastical place where they're the hero on their journey. They go into that experience and it absolutely stays with them, and it absolutely changes the way that they look at the world afterwards.
In these highly emotive and groundbreaking adventures, provocative energies are conjured.
Look at me. Where's the locals? Who's in charge? What's your name? Phillips. Get these people off the slip!
Here at Port Talbot, a one-off enactment of the Passion Play involved the townspeople.
You do with 5 minutes!
Real alchemy is created in such events. The need to connect, to inspire, to carry the audience off, to be the most talked about. Of course, there is no guarantee. The storyteller goes out on the high wire and then goes for it. That's the vertiginous daring that makes the difference. The top line in learning is very simple. If it's good, people will go with it. Hence the rise of box sets. The extended series like The Wire, Breaking Bad, Fargo, Stranger Things. These masterpieces set the tone. But more and more, the audience is wanting to fully indulge in the story. And this appetite extends to everything, from games to digital happenings to TikTok and Instagram, to any wild attempt at making a point that's got a touch more genius. You see, that is what those big stories are. Collections of lots of interlocking little moments. Touches, feelings, twists, nuances that drive the story on while keeping the audience on the trail.
I used to stay up late at night and watch, anything, Russian movies. And I used to love Kurosawa, and he did Seven Samurai. There's a scene near the end, because they've got a main character who's determined to be a part of this group. And you don't know what his motives are. And he's a bit of a buffoon and a bit and there's a scene when they have to go into I think it's a windmill, and it's on fire. And he comes out holding a child, and he falls to his knee and he starts crying. And then he goes, "This child is me. This is what happened to me." And I just remember it just really just made the hair stand up. And I love that about films like that, where there's these little subplots.
And along with all this expanding lucky dip of content and variation comes an expanding appetite. More channels, more content, more books, rolling news cycles, more stunning experimental events, more viral VR puppet shows, more magic. Today's audience has seen more great work than any in history. They know what's good, and they know what's not good.
A story that might have used to be interesting or used to be engaging, now because we're exposed to more extreme stories via the internet, now we're not just hearing what happened to our 5 friends, but we're hearing what happened to the thousands of people they're connected to. The stuff that tends to rise to the top tends to be more extreme. Unusual things are no longer unusual. We need the more unusual things. There's some nice research on language that shows that it's not enough for something to be interesting anymore. It has to be really interesting. We've sort of had this sort of ratcheting up of extremity. And so I think it has been interesting to see the stuff that goes viral today, the stories that do well, are even more surprising than they might have needed to be 5 or 10 years ago. But the psychology, the underlying behavioral science, I think has stayed the same. What has changed also, though, is our ability to understand it, right? Our ability to quantify some of these things, our ability to engineer stories to be more successful. If we understand why they work, we can build them, just like we can build a faster car or a better tasting product. We can engineer a story that will be more impactful.
Storytellers are forced to look for new ways to pop a spotlight on their agenda.
Everyone's talking about data as the new oil, and that's awesome. The problem with that statement is if you've ever used oil that's crude, it's useless. It has to be refined. And what does that mean? What does data refinement mean? The data could give you a crazy insight that you never thought of. And because that insight is reoccurring, maybe you should use that as the data point to create something that's really compelling around your story, and it's done creatively amazing. So the machine did what it needed to do. It unearthed something like an insight for you that you would have never stumbled upon. And given that's the case, your job now is this whole craft, this whole compelling reason, this whole reason of why. And by the way, we might screw it up. We might get it wrong, But we can get much closer to it if we actually act like the humans we are and come alongside the story, in my mind.
What we've done is we've used data as a cudgel to kill risks. We've tried to use data to make the safest story we can possibly make. You know, you said blue shirt, I show you blue shirt. That is the most boring story ever, but it works. And so for a set of people who don't want to take risks, that's what you can do. I think what we're starting to see is we need to use the data to make a story better, richer, deeper. And in a lot of the work that we do with entertainment companies or these longer form videos, they're really tapping into that sort of much deeper understanding, not a mirroring, you said this and therefore that, but resonance. What about this is, opens you up in a different sort of way. So I think the brands who can use data to do more emotional storytelling, that's going to be a home run.
This character in the video game Free City has been turning heads by being the good guy.
We love you, blue shirt guy!
Watch out for them! They seem nice.
Blue shirt guy is the first real artificial intelligence.
Whoa! Too high! Too high!
The challenges are real, but so too are the opportunities.
We have to fight for it! We have to fight together!
Because there is a way to make the most commonplace starting point larger than life. Because everything has a story in it. You just have to uncover it, find your way in.
We made an ad for Guinness with the Suppers, the Congolese dandies. People had never heard them before, but also just the life philosophy that they embody, they create, and having them as role models was just such an amazing thing to see out in the world.
In life, you cannot always choose what you do, but you can always choose who you are.
We, the audience, want more than just the art of making the story pleasing. It has to deliver something significant. And that potent layer, that deeper look, can at times come from very playful starting points.
The filmmaker, Georges Méliès, was one of the first to realize that films had the power to capture dreams.
The magic and promise of a great storyteller is that they are part of a great tradition. They're committed to the art of capturing the imagination, of getting into your head. Just as no one could have predicted that images on the walls of caves would evolve into the complexity of language.
Macbeth.
Had I 3 years, I'd hear thee.
Be bloody, bold, and resolute. Love to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth.
It is impossible to say where the tools of visual transference might lead next.
And when you see really transformational experiences, and you see people taking on board these lessons and doing things differently, then that drives you and propels you as a maker and as a storyteller and a creator of experiences to do this more and to advocate for it.
This is the pattern of adaptation that we've seen repeated as long as stories have been told. Take the core elements, the lifeblood of a story, and present them in a way that the audience will find new and original. And craft that in ways that either dissolve the barriers of resistance or sidestep them with new perspectives that allow the audience to engage.
For me, story is really about the art of making sure there's a hero and a villain and a purpose for somebody to lean into the brand. To build incredible stories, it needs to be more than that. There's the story, awesome, that's the bullseye. And then there's the performance, so does it do what it says on the tin? And will it do what it does on the tin? And then ultimately there's feel. Now why do I bring up feel? Because we're in this world now. We're thumbing through life. So feel is incredibly difficult. But it is a texture that we need to get back to because performance is what people over-index on. In fact, people lean on performance as an art of story, and that's wrong. Buy one, get one free. 50% off. That's all performance. the best performing product on planet Earth. Oh my God, total eye roller. That's not story. Story is the reason why I'm going to believe in it.
This advert was made by director Ridley Scott when Apple didn't even have a product. Actually, it was made because they didn't have a product.
A garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom.
At this point, Apple's future was tenuous at best. Product development had stalled.
Is more powerful a weapon.
But what the company did have was an insight.
One resolve.
People wanted computers, but they didn't want to be robots. So this advert didn't lean back on performance, it projected it.
We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
The tone defined the enemy. The hero was the freedom the computer could unlock, and it set the stage for the revolution.
I grew up in the world of big ads, little content, and now it's big content, little ads. So in the content world, what's the best piece that I've seen? And it's very easy for me to answer that, which is clearly it's the Lego movie.
Hello, I'm Emmett.
And they're like, well, what's so cool about that? So I just paid $20 for Lego to show me their products for 2 hours. You can't tell me that's not compelling. It's bloody righteous. It's incredible power of story. It's remarkable.
There is yet one hope. The special has arisen.
I think I got it, but just in case, tell me the whole thing again. I wasn't listening.
They've achieved the ultimate trick to arrive at the point where the customer no longer feels that they're being sold to, and to become so confident in the message that they become an advocate of your intent, your service.
The Force will be with you.
Always.
You have fans, followers, believers. At this point, the brand is acting like a superstar. They want to put the message on a higher plane. They're going for it. Let's take a short commercial break.
Why don't you let me fix you some of this new Mococo drink? All natural cocoa beans from the upper slopes of Mountain Nicaragua, no artificial sweeteners.
What the hell are you talking about? Who are you talking to?
I've tasted other cocos. This is the best.
Now this has to stop. Nobody has time for this.
Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time. Ain't nobody got time. Ain't nobody got time for that.
And everybody knows it. But we did for this.
An event seen from one point of view gives one impression. Seen from another point of view, it gives quite a different impression. But it's only when you get the whole picture you can fully understand what's going on.
And this. And this.
Look down. Back up. Where are you? You're on a boat with the man your man could smell it.
He waits. That's what he does.
They were made with ambition.
And I tell you what, tick followed tock, followed tick, followed tock, followed tick.
With respect for the audience and the clear knowledge that they were fighting for attention. They were trying to impress, and they were succeeding in doing so. The myth has been that the audience doesn't want to watch adverts. But the truth is, they don't want to watch badly told stories.
They just changed so that the TikToks can be 10 minutes long. It's not about short, it's about what we want. What TikTok is showing us and Shorts is showing us, it's that choice.
It's not true, this lie, that we can only sit still for a few minutes. If the story's interesting enough, we'll sit there for 3 hours. Do you know what I mean?
When you have a sort of new population, what's the stories that they want? Well, they want a story that's as long as is interesting. Like, there's no magic in a 15-second story or a 30-second story. It's as long as you can be interesting, the story's good.
So the secret formula, the magic ingredients that every story must have, that's what everyone's after. But what does that look like?
It's like the spaceship moment at primary school. It's like that first time on stage and feeling the thrill of it. They're the seminal moments, and actually what we're all trying to do with the work we're doing is make those moments for our audience and actually turn on that light bulb, create that glow that continues.
Endurance. Capable. Years.
Land on your own moon.
An edge, a perspective, a truth, an insight, originality, a challenge, some conflict, desire, audacity, surprise. Let the audience know that something is afoot. Give them a dog in the fight, a character they believe in, empathize with. Make sure what you're adding is something inspiring, something enriching, something worth repeating. And always remember that we are entering their personal space, their heads, their culture.
Trust me. Everything's gonna be fine.
And the only thing to fear on those enchanted summer nights is that the magic would end and real life would come crashing in.
The art of the story is changing. It is changing because the audience is changing. They have seen more, and they want more. They want better. They are, after all, only human. And as the storytellers serve that appetite, something in the exchange has to come from within, from the heart of the storyteller. This is something we touched upon earlier, but it bears repeating. The storyteller has to have an authentic desire to enhance the moment, to add something potent to the conversation, perhaps even to the culture.
Say hello to my little friend!
It isn't enough to report the facts like an impartial journalist. There has to be conviction, a personal touch, a sense of illumination, a generative force. If we truly want people to be interested in our story, then our message must be interesting. Find something unique to say, or at least a unique way to say it. That's how this works.
Hey, what about Major Kong?